Game 6 of the 2012 NFL season. A season that's meant to be mine, ours. We're meant to win the Super Bowl. Other folks, they don't know this yet, but I know it. My teammates, they might not even know it, but I know it. How do I know? Because I know. I can feel it in my bones. I can taste it. I can close my eyes and picture it. And I'm not shy about saying so. Man deals with the possible. God deals with the impossible. And this is an excerpt from the book we're going to talk about today. I Feel Like Going On, Life, Game and Glory by Ray Lewis and Daniel Paisner.
Welcome to Performers, the podcast that takes you into the minds of the world's most extraordinary athletes, coaches and performers. We're your hosts. I'm Dr. Greg Young and you've just heard from Dr. Duncan Simpson. As sports psychology experts, we'll guide you through the pages of their autobiographies, revealing the mindsets, the strategies and the habits that propel the world's best to the pinnacle of their fields. Our goal is always to help you to learn from history's greatest performers. For each episode, we read and then condense entire autobiographies into concentrated insights representing over 20 hours of work per episode. You gain not only the collective wisdom of these elite performers, but also access to over 30 years of our professional expertise in sports psychology. So, listening to this, you're saving countless hours while accessing the distilled wisdom and proven strategies of the best in their fields. Now, these episodes do take a huge amount of time and care to create, and we've been incredibly grateful for the support we've already received from some of you. If you find value in what we're sharing and you really want to help us keep it going, you can support the show by clicking the donate link in the show notes. Every bit helps us continue bringing you the stories that inspire and challenge. So Duncan, tell us a little bit about Ray Lewis and this book today.
Here are a list of his accomplishments, Greg. He was a high school state wrestling champion in Florida. He was an All-American linebacker at the University of Miami. He was drafted 26th overall in the 1996 NFL Draft by the Baltimore Ravens. He played 17 seasons with the Baltimore Ravens. He was a 13-time Pro Bowl selection, a 7-time first-team All-Pro. He was a 2-time Super Bowl champion. He was a Super Bowl MVP. He was the NFL Defensive Player of the Year 2 times. He is in the NFL 2000s All-Decade Team, the NFL 100th Anniversary All-Time Team, and Baltimore Ravens Ring of Honor inductee. Just a couple of career stats. He holds the unofficial NFL record for most tackles at 2,059. He's the only player in NFL history with 40 plus sacks and 30 plus interceptions in his career. And he's probably one of the scariest men you'll ever come across. This book itself was actually a very enjoyable read. It's brutally honest and difficult to read in places, but I think it's one you'll all enjoy listening to.
Wonderful. Why don't we jump in?
Let's do that. For me, the hard part was mostly on what I didn't have. I didn't have a father. I do now, but I didn't then. The man I now know as my father, Albert Ray Jackson, is a father in DNA only. He claims the title, but he didn't earn it. He looks like me, moves like me, but he never took time to know me, never played the part. He left the day I was born. He came back a couple of years later, stayed long enough to father my twin sisters, LaQuisha and Lakeisha, and not long enough to pick me up or change my diaper. As far as I ever knew, he was gone the next day. The same deal all over again. And as I write this, I think of a cycle of abandonment that's coloured my family. Every 20 years, there's been another link broken, another hard road laid, gone back 4 generations. My son, Ray Lewis III, is 19 years old. I am 39. My father is 59. His father, my grandfather, is 79. And my great-grandfather is 99. And the only one who's grown up with his father is my son. And then on the other side of all of this was my mother, Sinceria Smith. Oh my God, my mother had it hard. And it only got harder when she started having kids. But it was because of her strength that my younger brother and sisters were able to get by. It was because of her resilience that we had a chance, that I had a chance. Really, everything I do, everything I am, is because of this good, sweet, proud woman. My mother was 15 when I was born, on May 15th, 1975. So, Greg, a bit of backstory here. His mum fled to his great-grandmother's house in Mulberry, Florida when she was pregnant because her mum, Ray's grandmother, wanted to stop the birth and tried to pin her down and use a coat hanger. apologies for the kind of graphic image there for listeners. That's how it was written in the book. Despite her deeply religious beliefs in the sanctity of life, Ray's grandmother, a strong-willed Indian woman, viewed her 15-year-old daughter as far too young for motherhood and was determined to intervene. Of course, the mom went ahead with the birth, and a little bit more about the mom. My mother worked 3 jobs, so a lot of babysitting, cooking, cleaning was on me. I didn't complain then, and I'm not complaining now, because it was a blessing to be able to do for my family in this way. It's just how it was. Most days, my mother would come home from working the night shift at the hospital at 2 or 3 in the morning, dog tired, hoping to grab a couple hours of sleep before heading back out the door. I'd have to get my brother and sisters up and ready for school, then get my own behind to the bus stop. I was 8, 9, 10 years old. This went on and on for years and years. End of each day, it was the same deal, in reverse. I'd hurry home before the others, pick them up from school, the nursery, and get everyone started on their homework or dinner. Greg, there's a lot there, but I think it paints a pretty vivid image of Ray's upbringing here.
It paints an eye-opening and vivid image of a lot of things there, not just Ray's upbringing, but certainly the emotional backdrop, I guess, that's the thing that probably shapes his drive, which we'll learn about. His dad wasn't in the picture at all. That's clear and that's obvious. What stands out the most to me is just the weight of responsibility that he's got on his shoulders just as a young child. Basically, he's parenting his siblings while being a kid himself. And what's really powerful here is that Ray doesn't really tell the story from a place of victimhood. He sees the grind of this childhood. Maybe gift is a little bit of a strong word, maybe sort of as a blessing, a proving ground, an opportunity for himself. And that mindset is crucial here. 1, for his survival, and 2, for his growth. Now, obviously, we're not glorifying these challenges, but what we can do is really highlight how Ray's framed these and use these as essentially a tool for him.
One thing that Ray always wondered about was his name, which happened to be different from his mum and his siblings. So some backstory to that, Greg. His mum says, your father, he's chosen not to be in your life, so you're going to have to figure that out. There's no one to teach you how to be a man. I can't teach you to be a man. That's on you. But when it comes to your name, that's a whole other story. So apparently his mum was a bit of a looker, and he goes on with this wild story. And he says, the boys, they lined up just to talk to her, to be near her. So when she finally got around to telling my father about me on the day I was born, the day he turned tail, there was this other young man next in line, and he stepped up and helped my mother with the hospital bills. He was a military man, and he's done my mother a great good turn. So she reached out to him a second time, and she asked him to sign the hospital paperwork, where it's asked for the name of the baby's father, and happily, mercifully, he agreed. The young man's name was Ray Lewis, so my name became Ray Lewis just like that. My mother hardly knew the man, but it was a way to honor him. I was a way to honor him. I didn't meet him until many years later, when my own name was becoming well known. One more thing about my name. The story behind it tells you what it meant to grow up without a father. To represent the 4th generation of men in my family to grow up without a father. To grow up in a house with 3 sisters and a brother and everyone with a different name. And me with the name of a kind stranger who just happened to be there on the day I was born. That kind of thing, it leaves you wondering who you are, who you're meant to be, and how you fit in. Greg, we're hearing about a lack of clear identity here, aren't we?
Yeah, there's nothing more personal to someone than their name. It isn't just a moniker. For most people, it's a really clear and tangible link to their parents. It's probably our clearest symbol of identity. So for Ray, carrying the name of a stranger, it wasn't just about simple paperwork or administration. It was probably an emotional void that's been left by his father's absence, and that generational issue that he's born into, with essentially with no father figure in the picture for any of the males in that family. So that question, who am I really, that can haunt someone, especially when you're that young and you're trying to figure things out and carve a path in life. In fact, there are TV shows that even go through this process to help people figure out who they actually are. And yet what is really powerful for me here is that Ray doesn't let the ambiguity of his name define him. Instead, it really becomes part of the drive to create an identity of his own. And this offers a pretty important lesson for all of us, to be perfectly honest. Whether you're an athlete, a coach, or a leader, take the time to understand the deeper narrative that's driving you and towards the things that you want to achieve. Really ask yourself, what story am I telling about who I am and where I'm from? So that clear sense of identity, that can become your anchor when pressure mounts or you face really strong adversity. And if that identity feels uncertain or fractured in some way, know that you're not stuck with it. You have the power to shape it. Identity, to a degree, isn't really something you inherit. It's something that you build. And that building usually occurs through struggle, reflection, and ultimately intentional action.
Really deep, man. I appreciate that. I really love that last part. Identity is something you intentionally build. And, we're going to hear how he really crafts his own identity as he moves forward through his sport. Now, a little bit more, his mum's choices in men weren't always sound. Some of them had money, and some of them treated her and the kids pretty well. And two of them actually became her husbands. Ultimately, they provided some form of security. There was a home and sometimes food, and like I said, occasional stability. And again, additional siblings came along, a baby brother and sister. But none of these men stayed around for too long. And in the end, it was just kind of the mom and the five kids. The men were really a means for survival, Ray talks about, often bringing more harm than good, unfortunately. Some drank heavily, turning violent, and Ray unfortunately bore the brunt of their anger in order to shield his siblings. And one guy he talks about in detail was particularly violent with Ray and his mum. And he says, I already understood pain. I tried to explain this to people, but there's something lost in the telling. There's no way to communicate the doggedness of a small boy beaten down one too many times. I was so tired, so worn out by this guy's abuse. I could only will myself past it, over it, through it. So one of the things he explains a lot in the book, Greg, is that he had a deck of cards and he fell upon a activity whereby he would turn a card over, whatever that card showed, and whether it was a seven. If it was a seven, he would drop down and he'd do seven press ups. And then he'd turn the next card over, and whatever that number was, he'd do sit ups. And then he'd do the next card and the next card. And he just went back and forth doing press ups and sit ups all night.
Sounds like a shit game, Duncan.
It sounds like a really shit game. But he says the pain of all these push ups, all these sit ups, hundreds and hundreds of push ups, hundreds and hundreds of sit ups, they were nothing next to the pain this guy put us through. In some ways, the pain I put myself through was like my comfort zone. It was my way out. With every push up, I saw the light. With every sit up, I saw the light. Greg, anything from this section?
Yeah, there's two games I definitely don't want to play. But it is really it's really raw here, right? Like you didn't read a ton there, but it really has a visceral sort of reaction for you. And what stands out to me here is how Ray's going through the process of transforming that sort of pain that he's experienced into purpose. And that's coming through repetition, it's coming through routine. And I honestly think we saw similar insights from Gordon Ramsay in episode 35. And we've had some other performers that I feel have been going through very, very similar things. For a kid with no control over it sounds like utter chaos around him, those push ups and those sit ups, they're not just physical things, they're probably more of a psychological survival tool. They give structure, they give a sense of agency, and perhaps most importantly, they do give him something that he is actually able to control. So if we're able to take some positive out of a negative situation, which this definitely sounds like it is, this is the lesson. When life gets overwhelming, it's really easy to underestimate the power of simple, consistent actions, whether that's something like journaling, whether it's breath work, whether it's moving around, a training routine, just something that you do daily repetition, but particularly done with a real intention behind them. Those are things that can help you regain and reclaim control and maybe reframe some things that pain into progress, as I talked about. Just to put things simply, when you feel like you don't have control and you want it, find something small and actionable that you can control, regardless of what's going on around you. And I think that sense of control starts to wander back into your life.
And funnily enough, he takes a pack of cards everywhere he goes. When he goes to University of Miami and when he goes to the Baltimore Ravens, it's something he continues to do throughout his career. So let's jump into football. And he says, somewhere in there, I started playing football. First team I played for was Lakeland Lumberjacks. I was 10 years old in sixth grade. Football, real football, organized football. Couldn't have found me at a better time because I needed to get out and do my own thing. Find some way to channel all those emotions building up inside me. I mean, when you grow up on the wrong end of a beatdown, you look for ways to put some of that rage and frustration back into the world, and football became my release.
Duncan, it really sounds like this is a pressure valve for him, allowing him to kind of have that release as you talked about. And it came at a really important time when things around him were particularly chaotic. For listeners, especially those that are coaching or essentially parenting young athletes as well, this is a real reminder here. Sometimes the kid that plays the hardest for you is the one that's actually hurting the most. Having an understanding of what is going on in a young person's life, sort of outside of the field of play, as it were, that's really important. So, being able to start those conversations and really get an understanding of who your athletes are, because remember, these are people that play sport, not a football player, a soccer player, a tennis player. They are people that play soccer, football, tennis. And they might just be, channeling that emotion through that sport, which of course is a hugely powerful form of self-regulation. But if it's met with understanding, particularly from someone in that position of authority, a coach, again, a teacher, or just an adult, this can be really, really, really powerful for that athlete.
A fantastic reflection there, Greg. And we're just going to jump into a little bit about the environment in which he grew up. And he says, I wouldn't trade growing up there, which is Lakeland, for any place else. Wasn't a place to stay, though. It was a place to leave, but it gave it to you straight. It showed you what life sometimes hides. Our days were filled with hundreds of tiny battles. You'd get in the dirt and go at it. Some of those battles you'd win, some of them you'd lose, but you kept score, man. Everybody kept score. And after a while of this, day after day of going at it, you'd see where you stood. You'd look around and you'd see what was possible, just by how you measured up to the folks who were doing it before you, with you, against you. I wasn't the fastest kid in the neighborhood, wasn't the quickest, wasn't the strongest, but when we got a game going, I could figure it out. It was easy for me, reading the other players, getting to where the ball was headed. Don't know why, don't know how, but the game unfolded for me in a crystal clear way. But what I couldn't figure out right away, I learned soon enough. Mostly I learned by watching, seeing the whole field, and not just the field I was playing on at the time. The park was just across the way from where the high school team played. Our little field was just the same little field they used for some of their practices. So when I wasn't running around with my own friends, I was studying these older kids, watching how they lined up, how they moved, and how they made things happen.
Duncan, this for me is a really powerful reminder that intelligence in sport, it's not just about speed, it's not just about strength, it's about being able to see and being able to sense and being able to anticipate. Ray maybe had an innate ability to read the game, but he's also really cultivated that by studying and observing other people obsessively. Like I said, observation is acceptable theft. He didn't just play the sport, he observed, he learned, he mirrored. And as we've said time and time again, great performers are great problem solvers.
So as Ray's really starting to get into his football, of course his mum couldn't be around much because she had 3 jobs and 4 other kids to take care of. But luckily his first football coach stepped up and really supported Ray. And he said he was good to his word, picked me up to take me to practice, made sure I got home after, and covered my registration fee. But it went beyond that, of course. It went all the way to teaching us what it was like to be part of a team, a part of something bigger than just ourselves. Wasn't just me taking it in, no. We were a team full of lost, misfit kids. Most of us came from single-parent homes in the projects. Most of us couldn't afford to be out there every day during football season. We had someplace else we needed to be, chores we had to do at home, whatever. But Coach Biscuit knew we needed to be out there on the field with him. He knew it ran deeper than just football. Also, the Lumberjacks gave me a sense of community, a place to belong. In addition to Biscuit, there were 3 or 4 assistant coaches, and they took an interest in us, mentored us, checked in with us to see how we were doing off the field. For me, the game became my sanctuary. It took me out of my own head and whatever ugliness was around me, and just set me loose. The deal at home was that if I kept my grades up, I could keep playing, so I kept my grades up. I wasn't about to let anyone take this away from me. No, sir. So, Greg, it is fair to say that these coaches had a life-changing impact on Ray. Can you speak to the power of mentorship, especially for a young man growing up without a consistent father figure?
I certainly can. This is one of those moments where you'd see just how powerful mentorship and how important mentorship can be, not just for athletic development from a coach, but also for identity and for belonging. And just a little nod here to Coach Biscuit, phenomenal name, as is the Lumberjacks. But him and his staff, they weren't just teaching football. I know it looks like that from a distance. What they were doing was they were giving Ray and those other kids, and misfits, as he mentions, he's given them structure, he's given them safety, and just someone who shows up for them and takes an interest in them. Now, for a young man that doesn't have a father like Ray, that kind of consistent presence, and let's face it, a consistent male presence, that can do a job and fill a massive emotional void there. And it's not always just about the big grand gestures. It's about the rides to practice, the check-ins, the quiet belief that you're showing a kid that kind of indicates to the kid what they can become. So, going back to what his mom said, she said, and this is a direct quote, "Your father, he's chosen not to be in your life, so you're going to have to figure that out. There's no one to teach you how to be a man. I can't teach you to be a man. That's on you," end quote. So for anyone listening, especially coaches or educators, this is a reminder that the impact you make, it doesn't always show up on the scoreboard.
I fucking love that line. The impact you make doesn't always show up on the scoreboard. That gave me goosebumps. And I think when you read the text and you really hear how powerful these coaches were in Ray's life, literally life-saving. So a little bit about him and how he saw the game and started to really understand the game of football. And he said, "I started to realize that this was the essence of the game. All there was to it. Football, it was just one-on-one. All I had to do was to beat this one other person across the ball from me. That's it. One and done. Soon as I figured that out, I waited for the rest of it. Me beating another person, that was easy. That was nothing. Had to be more to it than that, right? But there was never more to it. This was football at its most basic. This was football all the way up to my time in the NFL. Beat the guy on the other side of the ball all the time if you can, more times than not if that's the best you can do." So, Greg, to many people, football looks very complicated. I've been watching it for years and I still don't know half the rules. But Ray has really taken all that complexity and figured out a key principle. It is one-on-one. And as we said it before, simplicity is complexity resolved.
It is a very complex game, but what Ray's been able to do here is distill it down to the essence of the game here. And this is what elite performance looks like. Breaking something down that's incredibly complex to its most simple, most actionable parts. So while other people can very quickly, like myself, get overwhelmed by schemes and terminology and pressure, Ray zeroes in on one thing. And what's that one thing? It's beat the man in front of you. That kind of clarity, when it becomes that obvious, becomes a competitive advantage. It lets you stay composed, particularly when you find yourself in high-pressure environments, i.e. the NFL. And I've said it before, the secret to high performance is just to nail the basics. So to be honest, sometimes less is more. So for those listening, ask yourself, what's the one thing I need to do to win this moment? Where can you find that anchor and kind of return to it consistently? That's when your performance starts to become incredibly efficient, but also incredibly powerful.
That's great. And let's hear a little bit more about his mindset when it came to football. And he says, "I told myself, no matter what, if the guy on the other side of the ball breaks out, no matter where he is on the field, no matter where I am on the field, I will take off after him. Hard, relentless, determined. I will chase him down. I will run through my own end zone if I have to." And he goes on, "Left me thinking, nobody can beat me to the ball. Left me thinking, ain't nothing I can't do." And it wasn't just to edge the other guy out. No, I had to run him into the ground, punish him. At 10, 11, 12, this was how I learned to play the game. Out of all that, there was a hard truth. There's only one way to win, one way to play, all out, all the time. And I owned that hard truth, man. I did. My thing was to hit the other guy so hard I'd make him think about quitting. He'd have no choice in the matter. In football, the only way you're remembered is by what you did to somebody. I took that in early on. It's not how many hard yards you gain. It's not how many passes you complete. It's how hard you hit, how you hurt. In my town, that's the way you earned respect. I always tell people to go at it all out, all the time, because you never know who's watching. All the way to the NFL, last snap in the Super Bowl, I played like there was some kid out there eyeballing me through a rusted metal chain link fence, modeling his game after mine. Greg, we've talked about simplifying the game down, and now we're hearing more about the mindset Ray Lewis is famous for, aren't we?
Definitely, Duncan. That's certainly what I think of when I hear the name Ray Lewis. It's relentless, uncompromised, and utterly clear about the standards that he holds himself to. But what's striking is really how early that mindset's formed. We're not just hearing about intensity, we're hearing about intentional intensity here. It's not just a strategy for Ray Lewis here, it's a value that he's sort of embodied. It's one that he absolutely lives basically on every snap by the sounds of it. And for him, it's how he's earned respect, how he's dealt with pain, and ultimately how he seeks to inspire other people, and probably did inspire other people throughout his career. And that image of the kid watching through the fence, man, that's a really powerful driver, not only for himself, but also for the person that is watching that wants to emulate you as well. A very similar approach is the one that Michael Jordan had in episode, I believe it was episode 28. He used a very, very similar motivational tactic, and his process was imagining it was a kid in the crowd who'd never seen him play, but all he wanted was for that kid to walk away with a certain image of Michael Jordan in his mind.
That's a great connection back to episode 28. So, as things progressed with his football, he also went out to watch his high school play, and he says, Friday night was game night at Bryant Stadium, and the whole town came out to watch the high school team play. Talk about Friday night lights. This was what mattered where I grew up. It's like the rest of the world was silent on Friday nights. In Lakeland, you lived and died with your team, so we weren't about to miss those games. I began to see what was possible. Eventually, it became a way up and out for me, but at the same time, I could see how it didn't always work out for everyone. That was a hard lesson, man. Plenty had talent, but it didn't shake out too good for them. They caught some bad breaks, got knocked to the ground by life. For years, Lakeland had been a real proving ground for a lot of athletes, but the community was hit hard by drugs, alcohol, and gang violence. In this way, we were just like every other community where folks were struggling to get by. But I knew these folks, so it was different to me. It felt like it was happening in Lakeland and no place else. A lot of our very best athletes got caught up in a swirl of some very bad decisions, going back to my father, my uncle, and that whole generation, and continuing up to the kids I used to watch through the fence on those squads ahead of me. It was like a cancer. One by one, these dudes started falling off the ladder. We still had a bunch of good athletes when I got to high school, some big dudes, some big time players. Greg, can you speak to the role environment plays in shaping a person's mindset and resilience? It seems like Lakeland gave Ray that relentless toughness, but it also posed that real risk. It was kind of a place where it could easily break you as well as build you. So, what stood out regarding how Ray navigated that environment?
You've hit the nail on the head there, Duncan. It is one that can build you or break you in equal measure. But what strikes me is that Ray's environment really given that sense of urgency, that hunger, that toughness, but it also came with those metaphorical landmines, drugs, violence, broken homes. And what really separates Ray isn't just that he's talented. Like you said, there's tons of talented people here. It's that he essentially stayed focused and stayed the course while other people got pulled under and pulled into that. Ray saw what could potentially happen and used that as a warning and not as a pathway. That's an incredibly hard thing to do, is not get sucked into the swirl of that chaos around you when that chaos feels normal. Even though you might not be aware of the environment you're in, it is always shaping you. But you do have ultimately a choice how you respond to that environment.
And at this point, we're going to circle back to his dad here, Greg, because he plays such a pivotal role. And this is just a real turning point in Ray's life. And he says, it was around Christmas time, and he sent for me. My mother told me he'd be by to collect me, take me for a visit. So I packed up a couple of things and went outside to wait for him by the curb. I was excited. Didn't have the first idea what I would say to this man. There was plenty of good in my life, but there was always room for more. I wanted some of that from him. And so I waited. The whole damn night, I waited. Past dinner, past bedtime, past when the cold didn't bother me. Finally, my mother came out and tapped me on the shoulder, said, I don't think he's coming, baby Ray. Not tonight. I went back into the house and cried. At 13, 14, however old I was, I just cried and cried like a big old baby. Don't know why I was so torn up over him for not showing, because I was used to him not being around. I was schooled in being disappointed by this man. But there it was. When I got through crying, I jumped back up on the push-ups and sit-ups, started flipping through the deck of cards like crazy. I got tired of waiting for my father to come round. Got tired of hearing people make excuses for him. Got tired of people telling me I looked like him, walked like him, played ball like him. Got tired of hearing his name. Things went back to how they were after the long night waiting by the curb. But now I was angry. Not just a simmering kind of anger that attaches to you over time, but more of a boiling anger, a fury. His pictures, his name, his legacy, it got to where I wanted no part of my father. And it worked out that this fury was coming on right about the time I started high school. Greg, as a father myself, this is a really heartbreaking passage to read, and he goes into even more detail in the book. And obviously, it has this profound impact on Ray mentally and emotionally, this Christmas abandonment.
It really is heartbreaking, Duncan. It's a tough listen. I'm sure it was a tough read. What stands out to me here is how this moment's really helped Ray to crystallize something in his mind. And that disappointment he's turned into determination, and he really does choose to double down on it. That really deep emotional wound, that's becoming fuel for him, and instead of letting him break it, he's embracing it and channeling it. Really, it's a drive for self-discipline and control. And like we've said before, tattoos and scars are different, and he's definitely had some very deep childhood scars.
So we've mentioned he's playing football and he's also playing basketball at the time, but quits as he's told he's too rough. And in one of the moments that he storms out the gym, he bumps into a wrestling coach who, again, another man that just stepped into his life and took the time to talk to him. And he said, look, I'll show you around the wrestling facilities, which was basically they moved the tables aside in the cafeteria. That was the wrestling facility. He doesn't immediately take up wrestling, but there's a seed that must have been planted. And about a year later, after this chance encounter with the wrestling coach, he does take up the sport. At one of his first wrestling competitions, a referee who knows who Ray is comes up to him and gives him the high school wrestling yearbook from 1975, which is the year that Ray was born, which included page after page of his dad, Albert Jackson's school wrestling records. And he says, as I tore through the yearbook, I saw the man didn't just set a bunch of records, he'd set all of them. There was his picture, a face that could have been mine. There was his legacy, a legacy I could not let stand. His name was all over the book. Most wins, most pins, fastest pins. Everything you could possibly win or accomplish, he'd done it. And as I kept looking at his name over and over, up and down the page, it set me off. Got me thinking his name didn't deserve to live on like that. Not the way he'd stepped out on me and my mother, me and my sisters. I took the book home and showed it to my mother. She says, where do you get that? I said, this man gave it to me, a referee. Said he used to be Dad's wrestling coach. My mother looked at the book for another few moments, looked at my father's picture, then handed it back to me. Said, well, what do you know? There was nothing else to say. I took that book to my room in the garage and studied it. Then I hung it over my bed, opened it to the page with my father's records. Every night I'd look at that book and get mad. That fury I'd started to feel, it grew in ways I couldn't even recognize. Seeing my father's name like that, seeing him celebrated, it set me off. I dropped to the floor and start flipping through a deck of cards, doing push-ups, doing my sit-ups. Just then, those push-ups and sit-ups came from a place of pure anger. And as I worked, as I raged, I said to myself, his name will never be remembered. I actually spoke those words out loud to an empty room. I said, I will erase that man's name. I said, it will be like he was never there.
And let me jump in here. We've said it before, and it applies wonderfully here. Excellence is the capacity to take pain. And this is such a powerful example of how deeply personal motivation can be. I don't know exactly how healthy this is, apart from the motivation to do push-ups and sit-ups. I would say that's probably healthy. But for Ray here, it does sound like he is maybe getting himself into an emotional situation that he doesn't necessarily need to be getting himself into. I don't know if pinning it above his bed was perhaps the best way to go about it. But in terms of his motivation, it's not just about setting records. It's about trying to rewrite that history and essentially erasing his dad. And it sounds very much like being in this small town of Lake, and he just can't escape the ghost of his dad, while at the same time he doesn't actually know him or see him. But that yearbook, it becomes a symbol of everything that he's felt his father didn't earn, the praise, the legacy, the accolades, at the end of the day, the name itself. And his training here doesn't come from ambition alone. It comes from that pain that he's experiencing. Maybe trying to reclaim that identity that he never really held in his hand, as it were, that he feels has been taken from him. And this is what we might call a dark driver. It's a source of fuel that's rooted in that anger, that abandonment, and even resentment. And while that can be an incredibly powerful source of motivation, it can also burn you out if it's not managed. Your motivation doesn't always have to come from a positive place. I think that's a given. but it certainly helps with its sustainability if it does come from that positive place. But if it's not, it does need to be channeled in a useful way. And Ray's turned, let's face it, fury into focus here, and that's what's given his work ethic that edge.
It's so well said, Greg, and there's definite parallels with our last episode on Gordon Ramsay and how he was driven to separate himself from his dad. And remember that Francis Ford Coppola quote I said last week was, the story of the son is always embedded in the story of the father, and nothing could be more true here with Ray and his father. To wrestling now, and as a sophomore he was 170 pounds, but Ray being Ray, he wanted to wrestle guys up to 200 pounds. And he says, I figured out straight away that wrestling wasn't all that different than football. It was one on one, that's all. Even with my lack of experience, my lack of coaching, long as I could outthink you, out hustle you, out drive you, I could deal with you. I was aggressive, but I had this switch in me that needed to be flipped. I needed to be confronted. So in his very first year wrestling, he makes it to states, but eventually his inexperience catches up with him and he loses. And he says, I was devastated, although the truth was I had no business being devastated. I just didn't know how to wrestle was all. I could battle the heck out of people. I could deal with them, grapple with them, drive them to the ground. But I was just throwing my strength around. I didn't have a plan, didn't have a clue. I was always one of the last to leave football practice, and I brought that same mindset to wrestling. I'd be there until Coach Poole shut off the lights and then would drop me off home in his blue pickup truck. His big thing was to keep moving out there on the mat, so my hands were always moving.
Duncan, I think the big message here is that effort and mindset often matter more than experience, obviously up to a point. So Ray doesn't know how to wrestle properly yet. He doesn't actually know the techniques or the skills that he needs, but he just outworks everyone. He's staying late, he keeps showing up, and he's got that consistency and essentially doggedness here. And it's a reminder that you don't need to have it all figured out. You really do just need to be willing to work for it and work towards it. And I think that's ultimately how growth happens.
You're right, and over time he's going to pick up that experience, he's going to pick up the technique, and in his junior year he's an absolute beast apparently, and he says none of his wrestling matches throughout the entire season lasted longer than 12 seconds.
Jesus.
He goes back to states and actually makes it to the final, but once again his inexperiences showed up in the final and he made a mistake and it cost him in the final. So moving into senior year, he's transferring some of his wrestling skills into football, just as he's kind of transferred his mindset from football into wrestling, as you just talked about. And he says, so we went back to work, but there was a whole other football season I had to get through before I could wrestle senior year. And you know what? I took wrestling with me out onto the football field because back then wrestling mattered most. Football was just a way to lift wrestling, a way to fill the time until wrestling. Slipping blocks, getting up under people, staying low, engaging. This became my off-season workout. I'd always approach football as a one-on-one game, hand-to-hand combat. That's how I broke it down. But now I knew what I was doing. Now I had all these moves. This was my first football season as a wrestler, a real wrestler, working with all the benefit of Coach Poole's training. And I was a different cat out there. I was. I'd learned from all that time in the gym, all that time on the mat, that I could make you react or lean a certain way. Running backs used to always wonder how I could find the same hole as them, the same time as them, and it was because of wrestling.
Duncan, what stands out here was how Ray's began to really intentionally integrate the technical and the mental aspects of two different sports. He's kind of fusing them together. And this is a great example of skill transfer and a really nice example of cross-training too. It's not just one of those fancy machines that you get in the gym. Too often, I think athletes compartmentalize their training and they see certain things as distinct and really separate entities. But what Ray's done, like I said, he's fused these experiences. He was thinking like a wrestler on the football field, and that's given him a strategic and probably a physical advantage. As strange as it sounds, it reminds me of Hicks and Gracie all the way back in episode 15. And if you remember, he used a movement coach, I think Orlando was his name, who got him to essentially move like a monkey around the gymnastics equipment and the bars that were sort of on the wall there. And that was a tool to help him with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, which obviously those two things aren't matched in the slightest. But it was the transfer, it was that as I mentioned, cross-training those skills that sort of meshed really, really nicely together. So for coaches and athletes that are listening, I think this is a reminder for you to help performers to see the connections between their experiences. They might see them as distinct, but look for growth across the disciplines, not just within the disciplines. And that's where we experience real versatility and where elite performance really begins to flourish.
Great points you made there, Greg. It's really that cross-pollination of skills we've talked about in previous episodes.
It's a really nice way to put it, cross-pollination. I like that a lot.
Jumping ahead to his senior year, and he says, by the time wrestling came back around senior year, I was good and ready. I was confident. I'd already snapped every one of my father's records. Most wins, most technicals, most pins. Some of those I snapped off sophomore year. The rest fell in my junior year. Each time I'd come home, take the book off the wall, make a little X through my father's name in the record book, say a little prayer, and hang it back up. I did that about a dozen times. The last record to fall was the fastest pin record, 7 seconds. Snapped that one my junior year. After that, there was just one record left. Only, it wasn't a record, it was a state title. He'd never won one of those. Nobody from Lakeland had ever won one of those. So this was my goal. Even with football heating up, lots of attention coming my way from college coaches, this was my one and only goal. Erasing his wrestling records and making it like he'd never ever been there, that's what drove me. Coach Paul knew this was my motivation and he fed into it. It was him reminding me my daddy had never won the state title. He used to always ask me, Ray, you're always so angry when you wrestle. Why you wrestle so mad? And I'd say, because I'm chasing demons, coach. It came from wanting to erase my father's name in the record book, to lift myself up by beating him down. Greg, the motivation here is clear. What do you take away from this idea of chasing demons?
What's striking is the relationship that he builds with his demons here. Most people run from the darker parts of their past, that's for sure. But Ray's kind of hunting them down and wanting to look them square in the eye and face them. And as I mentioned, he wants to use them as fuel. It's not just motivational fluff, this, or a feel-good underdog story. This really does feel like vengeance. It feels personal. It's got a sort of has a John Wick quality to it here. From a psychological lens, this might be what we call shadow motivation, right? The idea that some of the intense drivers often come from unresolved pain or rage or shame. And for high performers, those shadows can create incredible focus and incredible energy, but they don't just disappear on their own. You have to wrestle with them, if you'll pardon the pun, and that's literal in Ray's case. This story challenges us to acknowledge that greatness often comes with a cost, and we've heard this time and time again with a number of our performers. Sometimes the drive to be great is born in some really, really dark places. Not all motivation is clean. Sometimes it's just survival.
I love the John Wick reference, and thank you for your TED Talk.
My pleasure.
So, senior year, Ray is supposed to wrestle at 189 pounds, but Ray being Ray actually refuses and instead wants to wrestle at 220 pounds, even though he'd be giving away 20 to 30 pounds to other guys. The reason was he knew he could easily win at 189 pounds and he wanted to test himself. So there's a Disney ending and he wins the state title in his senior year, and this is a little bit of his reflection, and he says, and this right there was my finest moment as an athlete, hands down, no doubt. Those 2 Super Bowl victories, they were probably sweeter for the fans. Those Super Bowls will probably live on a little longer, a little louder, but for me, there will be no greater high than that state title at the Lakeland Civic Center. First thing I did was race into Coach Paul's arms, and as I pulled him close, I said, his name is forever over. Coach knew what I meant. He knew what this moment meant to me. Wasn't just about wrestling, wasn't just about the beauty of hard work and pain and chasing demons. It was about setting my father aside, burying his name, and freeing me to live my life on my own way, here on in, on my own terms. So, Greg, back to football here. He says in the book that he gets a lot of his big breaks in football, and you're going to hear some of these coming up, that he didn't often earn his big breaks per se, but rather doors opened for him when other players got injured or kind of serendipity took hold. So you'll hear numerous cases of this. It's kind of unique. As a sophomore, he's not a starter until the guy in front of him who's playing safety at the time breaks his jaw in a fight, not on the football field. So Ray gets into the game as a safety, and as a sophomore, he records 22 tackles as a safety, which, for context, is incredibly high.
Right.
Eventually, he would switch to his famed linebacker position in high school when once again the starter gets injured, and obviously linebacker is where he made his career. In his senior year, there was a lot of buzz around town about Ray, and he's really lighting it up on the field. And he says, football was a way to get me to college. That's all, at least. That's all it was at the time. College would take me the rest of the way, and back then I wanted to study business law. I had it in my head that this would be my ticket up and out. I would get my degree, get a job, and find a way to help my family. I wasn't thinking of making football a career. That came a little later. Meanwhile, I got a ton of recruiting letters, a ton of coaches calling me, but I still had my wrestling season. Back of my mind, I was still thinking wrestling was the way to go. So I was hearing from some schools wanting me to wrestle, some schools wanting me to play football, and some schools wanting me to do both. About the only school that didn't really have any interest in me was Miami. Wasn't all that far from home, but it could have been a million miles away, far as I was concerned. For me, I might as well have been in Alaska the way the Hurricanes were scouting me. So ultimately, he narrows down his choice between Florida State and Auburn to play football. He grew up as a FSU Seminoles fan, and at the time, the legendary coach Bobby Bowden was there. Anyway, the story goes he visits FSU, all is going great with Coach Bowden, and then he meets the defensive coordinator at the time, Chuck Amato, who told him, we think you're an exceptional athlete, but would like you to play behind Derek Brooks. And this did not go down well with Ray at all. And Ray says, I couldn't think of a thing to say in response. Chuck Amato, he must have seen I was stuck. So he kept on. He said, you know who Derek Brooks is, son? He said it like a question, but it wasn't a question. Of course I knew Derek Brooks. The dude could play. He'd go on to be a first-round NFL draft pick, win a Super Bowl with Tampa Bay, and play a bunch of Pro Bowls, and bust his way into the Hall of Fame. At the same time, he was the Seminoles' top linebacker. You watched football, played football, lived in the state of Florida? Of course you heard of Derek Brooks. He was all that and a little bit more besides. I said, yes, sir. He said, 2 years behind Derek, you'll be ready to go. I heard that and thought, 2 years? I thought, is this man for real? So I stood and I said, Mr. Amato, thank you, but no thank you. Coach Amato tried to turn the meeting back around. He stood and said, now hold on there, Ray. Let's talk about this. I said, no disrespect, sir, but how do you know I'm not better than Derek Brooks right now? I said it like a question, but it wasn't a question. I didn't give the man a chance to answer. I just walked out.
Wow, what a story that is. I mean, talk about unshakable self-belief. I don't think that's arrogance, but it is like a deep-rooted conviction that elite performers often have here. Even before the world recognises their talent, being asked to sit behind Derek Brooks, I mean, you listed out his talents there, future Hall of Famer, this and that. It's probably not the most insulting thing in most people's eyes, but not to Ray Lewis. He's got a totally different lens. He's not waiting his turn. He says his turn is right now, and it's that kind of mindset that's critical for those performers that want to lead, not follow. Now, it also reminds us that confidence, it's not just about ego, but it's about seeing that potential in yourself that other people might not necessarily see yet, having that belief, but also having that courage to act on it. Remember here, he's just turned and walked out the room.
And to close the FSU chapter, he says, years later, Coach Bowden gave an interview and he asked if there's anything he regretted in his long coaching career. The man had coached at Florida State for over 30 years, won 2 national titles, 12 ACC championships, probably one of the most accomplished college coaches of our time. And what did he say? He said his one regret was that he let Ray Lewis slip away from his program. So, backtracking slightly, by luck, Dennis Erickson, who was the coach of Miami, had been in the stands at one of Ray's games, but he wasn't scouting Ray. He was watching a wide receiver on another team, but of course, Ray had caught his eye. So when Ray rejects FSU, Miami comes calling, but the only reason Miami comes calling is because one of their scholarship players that they'd originally offered to has a serious knee injury. So again, a slot opens up on their roster. Hence, Ray Lewis at the very last moment goes to Miami. And a little bit of a kind of reflection as he transitions into Miami, and he says, underneath all that good stuff, there was sadness. There was struggle. The way I grew up, it doesn't leave you. No father, no steady paycheck, all these men, some of them abusive, in and out of our life. No clear path I was meant to follow. And that doesn't even include the tragedies that happened all around, the violence, the dysfunction, the desperation. What all this meant when I left for Miami was that I didn't know what normal looked like. Normal, as in how other folks grew up and how you see on television or in the movies. I didn't know what it was to grow up without people getting shot left and right. I didn't know what it was like to have a refrigerator full of food, or to fill a car full of gas instead of $10 worth or $20 worth, whatever. I didn't know what it was for a family to sit down at the same dinner table every night all together. I didn't know what it was supposed to be like on Christmas morning. In our house, maybe there'd be one gift, and we'd all have to share it. But that's just how it was. We were okay with that. We were. But now it was looking like my life was about to pop into a whole new world. Football I knew. Wrestling I knew. Faith I knew. So, Greg, I feel the way we're raised really shapes the lens through which we see the world. And unless you've walked in someone else's shoes, it's hard to really fully grasp their reality. You might be able to empathize, but truly understand, I'm not sure that you can.
This part of Ray's story really hits. What he's describing isn't just poverty, it's the absence of quote unquote normal. It's any baseline stability to measure life against. When you've grown up surrounded by chaos and scarcity, even understanding what's possible, that can feel out of reach. So when Ray says he doesn't know what normal looks like, he's not being dramatic by saying that. He's really just pointing out how far removed his starting line was from most people's. And yet that same lack of normal became fuel for him. And he's leaned on those few things that he did know, football, wrestling and faith, as you mentioned, and he's used them as anchors to move himself forward.
I really like that idea of the starting line. His starting line was just so much further back than a lot of people. So he goes to Miami and he's a late recruit, as I mentioned, and he's not even in the media guide. And at the time, Miami might have only been 3 hours away, but it seemed like another country for him. And like most freshmen, he was actually given a hard time by the veterans initially, but he quickly wins their respect, as you imagine Ray Lewis would. And he becomes a starter as a freshman after the starter blows out his knee.
This is starting to get suspicious. Is he going and doing something? Everyone seems to be blowing knees out around him. If I get my knee blown out after reading this book, I'm going to be livid.
I think there's like 4 or 5 people ahead of him that have a serious injury.
Interesting.
And Coach Erickson, who's the head coach at the time, announces to the team that Ray will be the starting middle linebacker, and his third game of the season as a freshman, they're actually playing a very good Colorado team in Colorado on national TV, and this is his reflection, and he says, the national television piece, it wasn't a distraction so much as it was a motivation. That's how I looked at it. Our motto was simple. Big time players make big time plays in big time games. Out of that came another motto. This is how we feed our kids. And this was just one of those games, how we made ourselves known. I paid attention to my stats, but then I always paid attention to my stats, counted my tackles. This was how I took my measure. Same way a basketball player might keep track of his points. 10 tackles, that was always the magic number.
That big time players make big time plays in big time games. Let me say that again. Big time players make big time plays in big time games. I'm gonna write that down somewhere.
So, Ray Lewis, by halftime, in his first game as a freshman on national TV away at Colorado, by halftime he has 10 tackles, and by the end of the game he has close to 20 tackles, a sack, and 4 pass breakups. And he says, it was just a crazy game, a statement game. So after the game, he tells a reporter, by the time I'm through, I'll be the greatest player to ever play for the Miami Hurricanes. And just like that, I was in the spotlight.
Confidence at its finest.
Yeah, he says, got a big response a line like that. It was all over the sports talk shows. Columnists wrote their little pieces left and right. So his freshman year, they go 9-3. They lose in the Fiesta Bowl. In his sophomore year, the Hurricanes go 10-2 and lose to Nebraska in the Orange Bowl. In his junior year in 1995, they go 8-3, but they don't go to the postseason because of NCAA sanctions. So he had a really good college career, but he never actually won a national title. The Hurricanes won the national title in 1991 and again in 2001, but not during his years. As of April 2025, Ray Lewis still holds the top 2 spots for single-season tackles in a Miami Hurricanes uniform. He was also an All-American and came runner-up in the Butkus Award for Best College Linebacker. So, Greg, a bit of trivia for you. What famous entertainer and movie star also played for the Hurricanes during Ray's time there.
What's this? 1995. Oof. No, I'm drawing a complete blank here.
Little trivia for our listeners. Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson.
Of course it is.
Yeah, there we go.
Lad, oh, man, come on, can we edit that bit out and make me get it right? I feel bad. I should have known. I feel like I should have known that.
Yeah, you probably should have known that. So I looked it up. And so while Ray was there, he played with The Rock, and The Rock played a defensive tackle. I should really call him Dwayne. He was Dwayne during that time. Dwayne faced limited starting opportunities, primarily because he was a backup to future NFL Hall of Famer Warren Sapp.
That's a pretty solid reason as well.
So back to Ray after Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. So after his junior year, he decides to declare for the NFL draft. By this time, he had brought his whole family down to live with him in Miami in his friend's 2-bedroom apartment because his mum didn't have any money at the time. Once they moved down, they were really scrambling to stay ahead of bills, and Ray was loading up on food from the dining halls to take home to his mum and siblings. So they were really struggling. Additionally, he'd also gotten news that his girlfriend at the time, Tatiana, was expecting his first child. So that's the backstory. His family really need the money, and his girlfriend is expecting the first child. So he declares for the NFL draft, and he says, that was a big draft for wide receivers, the way it played out. But I wasn't counting wide receivers. No, I was counting linemen and linebackers. And there were 6 of them taken off the board by the time we got to the 20th pick, which belonged to the Miami Dolphins. 6 guys went ahead of me because of size. And just so you know, not one of them lasted in the league longer than 7 years. Each name was like a dagger. But something told me I was destined to fall to the 20th spot. I mean, I was sitting right there in their stadium. I'd played my college ball right under their noses. The Miami fans, they loved the way I played. I was a Florida boy through and through. So I told myself it was all good. All those defenders going ahead of me because it was set up for me. But then the Dolphins drafted Darryl Gardner, a defensive tackle out of Baylor. Let me tell you, the boos that came on the back of that call were like sweet music to my ears. These Miami fans, they had no interest in Darryl Gardner.
Duncan, I've said it before, chips on shoulders equals chips in pockets.
He definitely gets some chips in his pocket. So in the 1996 draft, Ray was eventually drafted 26 overall by the new Baltimore Ravens, who were formerly known as the Cleveland Browns. They became the Ravens in 1996. Being drafted in the first round gave him the financial freedom to bring his entire family, except his girlfriend Tatiana and their now son, who didn't want to move to Baltimore. They actually stayed with her family in the Orlando area, which was really tough on Ray, but his mom and his siblings all moved to Baltimore. One more piece of trivia, Greg. Who was the first pick in the draft that year?
86. It said it was a lot of receivers, right?
A lot of receivers. You want a clue?
Sure.
Funnily enough, he was mentioned in one of our other performers' stories.
Ooh, Oh, what's his name? Serena Williams, the one who will be Keyshawn Johnson.
Keyshawn Johnson,
Keyshawn
correct.
Johnson.
There we go.
All right, but we're back on the trivia train, Duncan.
I'm not sure how good of podcast listening that was, but we'll see. We'll keep it in. In his first career game for the Ravens, in a really tight game with time running out, he gets an interception, and this is just to really move the narrative forward. And he says that interception with time running out, it was the AFC Player of the Week, made all the highlight packages, sent a message around the league that we were back in business, told all those scouts and general managers who'd looked past me on draft day that maybe they should have paid a little less attention to how tall I was and a little more attention to how big I played.
That's nicely put, Duncan. This moment, it encapsulates the chip on Ray's shoulder and the mindset that he's brought into the league. From day one, he's determined to show every scout and every GM who's passed on him what they've missed.
So after his first 4 seasons, everything was going well for the team. They were getting more and more competitive. In his first year, they were a 4-12 team. In his second year, they went 6-9-1. Third year, they go 6-10, and fourth year, they go 8-8. Ray led the team in tackles every year and led the league in tackles twice. And the Ravens defense was really becoming a force. And if you know anything about Ray Lewis, you'll also know that he got himself into a little bit of trouble at the end of his fourth season. So in the book, Ray goes into the incident in a lot of detail, and he professes his innocence too. And we're not going to discuss the incident in too much detail because it doesn't really fit the purpose of this podcast, but we're not completely going to brush over it. So in January 2000, Ray Lewis was arrested and charged with murder in connection with a fatal stabbing of two men outside of a nightclub in Atlanta following a Super Bowl party. Lewis, along with two companions, was accused of being part of a fight that led to a double homicide. All three men were indicted on murder charges and aggravated assault charges. Lewis was held without bail for 11 days and faced the possibility of life in prison if convicted. However, the case never actually went to trial for him. Several weeks into legal proceedings, the murder charges were eventually dropped as part of a plea agreement. He pled guilty to a misdemeanor charge of obstruction of justice for giving false statements to the police during the initial investigation. As part of the deal, he agreed to testify against his co-defendants who were later acquitted, and the criminal case ended. But in 2004, Lewis did reach a confidential financial settlement with the family of the two victims as part of a civil wrongful death suit, and the case itself remains officially unsolved.
So you're saying Ray was a grat?
Well, I wouldn't say that to his face, and I'm saying no matter the pancake, there's always two sides.
I mean, that sounds like, quite the light-hearted joke about a murder charge.
Yeah, sorry about that. But again, just needed to give that context. I mean, I think this situation really does follow Ray for the rest of his career. Again, he never actually was found guilty of murder, and he professes his innocence in the book. So go back, buy the book, read that section. He says, throughout this period, the Ravens organization, his teammates, and their fans stood behind him, but he says he faced real racism wherever he went in the league after that. With that all in the background, he says, we had a shutdown type defense, a monster defense. There are a lot of folks who study the game who'll tell you that this 2000 Ravens team was the fiercest, most tenacious, most dominant defensive team in the history of the game. Not one of the fiercest, the fiercest. Hands down, second to none. We allowed the fewest points ever scored in a 16-game season, 165, a record that still stands. We allowed the fewest rushing yards too, 970, which works out to roughly 60 yards per game, also a record. You just couldn't run on us, but we had a tough time scoring. We were inconsistent.
Those are some wild stats.
Unbelievable. Averaging 60 yards against them in the run game. That's pretty crazy. So with this kind of monster defense in 2000, they make it to the Super Bowl versus the New York Giants. And he says, the Super Bowl was in Tampa that year, 20 minutes up the road from where I grew up. So that was a personal thrill to be playing on such a big stage so close to home. A lot of athletes talk about these big moments and say they're surreal, but that's not how it was for me. No, this was as real as it gets, and I savored it, drank it all in. Couldn't quite believe it. After the year I'd just had, the trials I'd just had, that I was standing on this field at this moment. About the New York Giants, he says, Kerry Collins, are you kidding me? Tiki Barber? Are you serious? It was a joke to us this game. It wasn't even an issue this game. And we bashed these boys. We dominated. The final score was 34-7, so the game was never in doubt. That one touchdown for the Giants came on a 97-yard kickoff return, so we were good on our word on defense. They didn't score on us, and it worked out that I was named the game's most valuable player, which was an important validation for me, coming off these years I'd just had.
Clay, if you're listening, I'm sorry for your Giants, man.
Did our friend Clay just catch a stray bullet from you then?
He did.
Catching stray bullets. So I always love these kind of little side stories. And an interesting side story here is, I think you'll know, and some of our listeners will know, that the Super Bowl MVP usually gets asked, what are you going to do next? And the Super Bowl MVP's answer is supposed to be, I'm going to Disney World. Well, this is a bit of a Super Bowl tradition. Whoever was in charge at the time didn't really think it was a good look to have Ray Lewis, who was the MVP, kind of being the face of Disney. So instead, they approached the Ravens QB, who was Trent Dilfer, and he took Ray's spot, a bit of a sneak. And Ray was not happy at Disney at all for that.
No, I don't blame him. I mean, I don't know. I can't picture Ray Lewis at Disney, to be perfectly honest. It doesn't fit in my head. But what this does serve is it's a reminder that the validation doesn't always come from public approval. It comes from, well, it has to come from within. I'm not saying that Ray didn't deserve some of the scrutiny he got, but, who doesn't want a free trip to Disney World?
Exactly. So after his Super Bowl win and jumping ahead a little bit, he decides he's going to reconnect with his dad. And he says, I can't say for sure when I got the itch to call my father, but I can say for sure when I first scratched it. I was 33 years old, established in the league, a father myself 6 times over. It was time. My father wasn't a bad man, just a bad father. He didn't have the tools, that's all. He didn't have the frame of reference. He could be a daddy, because that was just genetics, biology, whatever. But a father, he didn't have it in him. Basically, because his father didn't have it in him. And my granddaddy's father didn't have it in him either. So Ray eventually meets up with his dad, and his dad even takes him to meet his granddad, who he'd never met. Although the initial meeting didn't go great for Ray, apparently his dad just talked about himself the whole time, he did manage to get some closure with his dad, and he says, and in this moment I realized I no longer needed to think of him every day, at least not in the same ways. No, I could think of the man I'd become instead of the boy I'd been. I could think of my own children. I could pledge to love them even more, be there for them even more, fill up all those spaces in their lives where my daddy should have been in mine. My sisters, they wanted nothing to do with this man. They would have told you I was their father, not the man in the front seat with me. I was the one who'd raised them, looked after and fought for them, not him. I was the one they came to when there was something going on. But I had to let all of that go. Meeting my grandfather like this, seeing my father like this, it was time to let the bitterness slide. My whole life had been bitter. My whole career, I was bitter, angry. It's how I played the game. I had my mad on, and I laid it all out on the field. But I didn't need to hold on to that bitterness any longer, I realized. I was good. My mom, my sisters were good too. No, this man who called himself my father didn't change a single diaper, didn't make a single one of my games, didn't lift a single finger for a single moment in the service of a single one of his children. And it wasn't just me and my twin sisters. He had 10 children in all, scattered all over, and I could bet he was just as useless each time out. But I started to think, without this man's uselessness, I wouldn't have pushed myself so hard. What I'd learned from my father was the kind of father I would not be. It was the greatest motivation in life to be a real father to my children. And I felt it rise in me the first time I held my son Junior in my arms, Ray Lewis III. So Greg, this is really powerful, and certainly a moment he seems able to let go of some of this pent up anger and negative emotions.
It's one of the most emotionally mature reflections we've heard from Ray throughout this podcast. After that lifetime of bitterness, he's finally reached that place of clarity. Forgiveness isn't about letting someone off the hook. It's about maybe freeing yourself. And it sounds like he recognizes that holding on to that anger, yes, it shaped his entire identity, but it was no longer really serving him the purpose that it maybe once did. And what's really striking is how he decides to reframe the pain that he's experienced. His father's absence didn't just leave a wound there. It really did light a fire that he used to great aplomb. It's given him a mission, ultimately to be the father his own never really was, and that's the lesson here. Your past can explain you, but it doesn't have to define you. And the most powerful thing you can do is turn your pain into purpose.
I love that. Your past may explain you, but it doesn't have to define you. That's a great line, Greg. So jumping ahead, the book itself doesn't go kind of game by game. So even if you're not a football fan, it's very easy to read. Jumping to October 14th, 2012, he suffers a complete tear of his right tricep in the 6th game of this season versus the Dallas Cowboys. Ray knew he was actually going to retire at the end of this season, but he hadn't told anyone, and he was absolutely desperate to get back to the Super Bowl. They had a phenomenal team, and the surgeon told him that if he rushed back and he tore it again, he could actually lose the use of his arm completely. So it was a pretty serious issue. And he says, the surgery went the way it was supposed to go. Dr. Uride did what he was supposed to do. Now it was on me to do my job. And as I came to in that hospital bed, I set my mind to what lay ahead. A lot of folks, they change things up when life gets hard. But me, I'm cut a different way. I always tell people that if you show me your failures, I'll show you your future. And here, I would not let myself fail. After all, it's your struggles that define you, and compared to what I'd been through, this was nothing. So I started in on my cocoon time, turned my full focus on getting back to whole. In Arizona, I probably averaged about 3 hours of sleep each night. All day long, I had therapy. If the doctor suggested 2 sessions each day, I pushed for 4. Let me tell you, I experienced more pain in those first few weeks after surgery than I'd ever known, and it was all because I was pushing myself way past what these doctors and therapists were telling me. That 12-week timeline, it wasn't quick enough for me, so I had to double down and dial it in. I was in the middle of my own movie, getting my body back to where I needed to be, turning myself into a machine. I was coming back, willing myself back, and I was coming back pissed. I was on a mission because this was my last ride out there, and I had to make it count. Greg, it's important that we're not specifically advocating to go against medical advice, but the context is vital here. This is his final season, and he really, really wants to play in the Super Bowl again.
Yeah, that context really is everything here. This isn't just about coming back from injury, which of course it is. It's about chasing that closure as he comes towards the end of his career. So he's not trying to prove that he can heal faster than anyone else. What he's trying to do is he's trying to finish his story on his own terms, and that's the lesson. When something really, really matters to you, your level of commitment usually changes. And he hasn't gone through that recovery process just like a checkbox exercise. He's really treated it like his purpose, going into cocoon mode. I really like that phrase. Most people rest when they're tired. Ray was determined to rest when he was done. There's a fine line between recklessness and relentlessness, and Ray really walked that line with full intention. What made the difference is his mindset. He didn't see the injury as a setback, but probably framed it as a test. And in his mind, the only acceptable outcome here is to pass this test.
So the surgeon had told him 12 weeks was best case scenario. He returned to practice after approximately 7 weeks, but made his return to the playing field in the wild card game versus the Colts, which was, several weeks after that. And he says, I kept saying to myself, man, listen here, your arm hurts like hell. You're about 70% healthy, and you can't really move your arm without pure pain. So what are you going to do? Well, there was only one thing to do, really. I told myself that if I was going to go out, I would go out on the battlefield. I was too far in. I'd already announced I was playing, so there was no backing out. So I walked out there and I looked at that crowd, and you cannot tell me different, that I was not stepping out there for all those black folks, for all those underdogs. Whatever it is, stand for something. That's the message that was driving me when I came out of that tunnel. Whatever pain I was feeling, it didn't matter. But I didn't come all this way to lose. So, Greg, anything from this section?
Yeah, I think it's a Kobe Bryant quote, which you can go back and check in episode 8. He said, when purpose is bigger than pain, purpose wins. It's as simple as that.
I love that quote. So, of course, the Ravens win 24-9 against the Colts, and Ray, who is 70% of the time, has 15 tackles. The Ravens then beat the Denver Broncos, the New England Patriots on the way to the Super Bowl versus the San Francisco 49ers. But he says, but the pain in my arm was like nothing I'd ever experienced. The pain was debilitating. Playing through pain, it was no big thing. But this wasn't about playing through. This was about powering past, rising above, getting my body to do things it wasn't designed to do. Every one of these playoff games, it set me back, sent me reeling. All those tackles, those hits, they sucked the little life out of me. And by the end of the postseason run, I'd been credited with 51 tackles, a playoff record I'm betting won't ever be broken anytime soon.
I don't think it will be. What he's describing here, Duncan, this is next level pain tolerance. It's the kind that goes beyond physical endurance and more into the sort of the mental realm. It's not just about managing that discomfort. It's about completely reframing it. Accepting that pain is part of the process and choosing to push forward anyway is part and parcel of it. But this is another level. Maybe we've seen this before in some of our endurance athletes, Chrissy Wellington, Des Linden, and of course Lance Armstrong. Those three come to mind. Suffering becomes a companion rather than a barrier for those people in those sports. The key thread between them and Ray is this: the best don't really avoid pain or try to avoid pain. What they do is they redefine the relationship that they have with the pain. There's a saying in endurance sports, the pain, it's inevitable, but suffering is optional. Sounds very Buddhist as well. And in Ray's case, that mindset, that's what helps to fuel this record-setting postseason when most people would have been on the sideline in civilian clothing. They wouldn't even been dressed.
I really like that. It's how they redefine their relationship with pain. And to keep in mind, the teams he's beaten, he was up against Andrew Luck, Peyton Manning, and Tom Brady, and now would face an on-fire Colin Kaepernick.
That is quite the lineup to beat.
So in the hotel prior to the Super Bowl, he's staring at the mirror and he says, the pain of being incarcerated, abused, violated, the pain of being judged for a terrible crime that had nothing to do with me, the pain of fighting back from a career's worth of injuries and surgeries, and finally, there was the pain of this right here. Only I couldn't tell anybody about it. I couldn't tell our team doctor. I couldn't tell my coaches, my teammates. I could only stare myself down in the bathroom mirror and find a way to power through, to rise above, to ask my body to do the impossible. I thought about what it meant to be a leader, because really, that was the spot I was in. I thought how I might lead if I couldn't really play. I thought, how do you go into the greatest battle ever and not tell your soldiers what's really going on? But to tell them would have been to take away one of our greatest weapons. Didn't matter just then that I couldn't fire with the same intensity I'd always brought to the game. Didn't matter that I couldn't execute. It only mattered that I took the field and put it out there, that I was the force to be reckoned with. The same force I'd always been. I could lead my teammates just by putting my helmet on and lining up on the field. And that is where we'll leave it.
Whoa, cliffhanger. Did they win?
Yes, the Ravens won 34-31, and with his second Super Bowl win, Ray Lewis announced his retirement after a legendary 17-year career with the Baltimore Ravens. So, Greg, what are your top 10 life lessons from I Feel Like Going On, Life, Game and Glory by Ray Lewis and Daniel Paisner?
A lot to chew on there. Let's see what we can come up with. Our top 10 life lessons from I Feel Like Going On by Ray Lewis. Number 1, use pain as fuel. Transform your deepest struggles into relentless motivation. Ray said, the pain I put myself through was like my comfort zone. It was my way out. Number 2, let your work ethic speak. Talent matters, but dedication defines you. He says, all I know is how to work. Number 3, channel your anger, don't waste it. Use emotion with purpose, not as an excuse, but as a fuel. Number 4, declare your vision, then back it up. Confidence is powerful if you're willing to do the work behind it. Ray says, by the time I'm through, I'll be the greatest player to ever play for the Miami Hurricanes. Number 5, lead through actions. Sometimes just showing up is the most powerful thing you can do. He says, it only mattered that I took the field and put it out there that I was a force to be reckoned with. This is playing in his second Super Bowl with an injury. Number 6, beat the man in front of you. Simplicity can drive greatness. Focus on the moment, the matchup. Ray says, football, it was just one-on-one. Beat the guy on the other side of the ball. All the time if you can, more times than not, if that's the best you can do. Number 7, use setbacks as setups. Even injuries and failure can be chapters in bigger comeback stories. He says, if you show me your failures, I'll show you your future. Number 8, protect and provide for others. Greatness, it's not about you. It's about who you lift up along the way. He says, I was the one who'd raised them, looked after them, fought for them, not him. Talking about his siblings, of course. Number 9, stay relentless. Never take a play off, because someone, somewhere, is watching and learning. He said, I played like there was some little kid out there, eyeballing me through the rusted metal of a chain link fence, modelling his game after mine. And finally, number 10, finish what you start. High performers don't quit on their last rep, their last season, or their last game. He says, I was on a mission, because this was my last ride out of here, and I had to make it count.
Another fantastic top 10, Greg, but what are your top 10 behaviors to avoid from I Feel Like Going On?
Plenty of cautionary tales here, so here are my top 10 behaviors to avoid from I Feel Like Going On. Number 1, letting bitterness drive you forever. Anger can fuel growth, but clinging to it can burn you out. Ray says, but I didn't need to hold on to that bitterness any longer. I realised I was good. Number 2, waiting for someone else to save you. Don't wait for a father figure, a coach, or a lucky break. Build yourself. The book says, there's no one to teach you how to be a man. That one's on you. And that's his advice from his mother. Number 3, playing it safe. Growth doesn't happen in the comfort zone. He says, I could have wrestled at 189 pounds, but I wanted to test myself. That was my goal. Number 4, hiding from hard conversations. Avoidance only delays growth. Lean into the truth even if it's uncomfortable. He says, whatever it is, stand for something. Number 5, ignoring preparation. Natural talent without obsession for detail doesn't last. He says, I always paid attention to my stats. That was how I took my measure. Number 6, measuring yourself by others' standards. Don't let anyone else decide your ceiling. While talking about his visit to FSU, he says, how do you know I'm not better than Derek Brooks right now? Number 7, being silent about pain. Suppressing struggle can isolate you. Leadership includes honesty. He says, I couldn't tell anyone about it. I could only stare myself down in that bathroom mirror. Of course, speaking about his tricep injury. Number 8, running from your past. Avoiding the past doesn't heal it. Facing it does. He says, it was time. I scratched the itch to call my father. Number 9, defining success too narrowly. Big moments don't always define you. The quiet wins often matter more. He says, those 2 Super Bowl victories, probably sweeter for the fans, but for me, there will be no greater high than that state wrestling title. And finally, number 10, thinking hard work ends. You don't arrive, you evolve. He says, I don't know what taking a break felt like until after all that confetti dropped in New Orleans. Thank you so much for joining myself and Duncan on this episode. If you enjoyed the episode, please consider supporting the show by clicking the link in the show notes and at least share this amazing podcast with people that you know. See you next time on Performers.